when you look forward, Alfonso, and you think about what's going on in the U.S., there's so much controversy these days. I know you play in the U.S. market, but you certainly are hearing the stories about the U.S. losing reserve currency, and what happens if Trump gets in, Biden's out, or DeSantis is in, whatever the story. When you kind of assess a market like the U.S., are you very specific in terms of the states that you're in? How are you looking at economic conditions? Again, I want to just touch on what your thoughts are on even reserve currency. Are you paying attention to that, or is that a little bit just like noise to you? Doesn't matter. We're moving forward. Give me your thoughts on that.
Well, if you want to be wealthy, you have to study wealth. If you want to be wealthy, you have to study the monetary system, and you need to understand money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we already know that after 1971, they removed the gold standard from the
U.S. dollar, yeah.
the U.S. dollar. All currencies became fiat currencies.
Yeah.
As Canadians, we often look at, it's almost like we're looking out the window at our crazy neighbor, right? And we're just laughing, eating popcorn from the outside. But what Canadians don't really understand is, like, we are indirectly connected to that economy.
Mm-hmm.
The reserve currency means that all currencies that are subscribed to that monetary system, we are connected to that currency. So if the US goes down, we all go down in terms of the value of money. But I have a question for you. We know about hyperinflation, right? Yeah. And we know what can happen with hyperinflation. What does it mean when we talk about currency, right? Mm-hmm. It's a perceived value. When that perceived value is no longer there, money becomes worthless, right? Pieces of paper. And so, what do you think the debt, the U.S. national debt, where do you think we're at? And I'm asking you because I don't really know. I think it's in trillion something, but I don't know the exact number.
Yeah, it's astronomical. It's like 30 trillion or something along that line.
What about Canada?
What's that?
What about Canada?
Well, Canada personal debt is about 186% of debt to income. So we're over the top. Personally, government, in terms of what our combined is, I want to say it's about 130%, something like that. So, I mean, our government took on a ton of debt. No doubt about it. They overreacted in my world to what were these pandemic conditions. They used it as a license to flood the market with capital. That's a lot to do with where we are today. We now have interest rates going up, and the debt has to be serviced. Right. Our government, sadly, and I can rant on this for a long time, we are a non-productive country. We are sadly non-productive. We are debt-driven consumerism, and a lot of our economy, our GDP, is built off of housing, for example. Our manufacturing has been declining for years. We invest very little capital into research and development, sadly. The immigration, which we talked about earlier, Alfonso, yeah, that's really supporting this economy, but it's because a lot of people are setting up house. So there, again, it is based on consumerism, as opposed to, why aren't we exporting tons of commodities? We have what the world needs. Everything from oil to fertilizer to lithium, you name it, we have it. Yet our imports, exports are almost virtually net zero. Our exports are sometimes more than our imports a little bit, and vice versa. The point is, when we look at what's happening in Canada, we look at the debt, to your point, the flooding of the monetary system or of currency certainly has a huge impact on all that we're doing. And even in the comment that you made about, the U.S., Canada being so connected to the U.S., that's who we farmed our research and development out to. So rather than driving our economy. And I know I'm going a little bit long on this because I'm pretty passionate about just how incompetent our government is. And Bank of Canada, I've said it many times, I want to be the guy that looks at Tiff Macklem and goes, "You're fired." I'd like to do the same with Trudeau. That's a totally different conversation. But I think there's a fundamental around the U.S. and Canada, and why we have to pay attention to what's going on in the U.S. there's a little meme or a little phrase that's, really old, but it is basically, when the US sneezes, Canada catches a cold. And ultimately, that's what's going to, and we are at risk of having happen given these global issues and the devaluation, if you will, of the US dollar and the, ultimate collapse of the US as a reserve currency. Now, that's not to say that's going to happen tomorrow or next year.
Yeah,
It,
no one has a crystal ball.
it will definitely happen. We just don't know when.
So
So,
this is what I wanted to get at. So we understand the governments are definitely taking on massive amounts of debt.
yes,
I mean,
huge.
we talked about 30 trillion or whatever. I mean, people throw these numbers around. Like, have you ever seen $1 trillion? Like you wouldn't even be able to fit it in this office building,
Yeah.
right? A trillion dollars is a lot of money.
Yep.
And so here's my next question. What happens if the currency? So the first question is, how in the world are they going to pay this back? Okay, that's the first question. The
Taxes.
second, the second question is, what happens if there's a complete collapse of the monetary system?
Mhm.
What happens to all that debt?
Well, there's lots of conversation around a debt jubilee. I mean, maybe that's a possibility. Maybe they just forgive it all.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, I mean, it doesn't ultimately. If we hit hyperinflation,
yeah,
and the value now all of a sudden the value of that $1 trillion is really more, more like 100 million. In essence, that is how they're going to pay for their debt,
yeah,
right? In essence, when you look at it, there is a benefit to the government for going into hyperinflation, right? And collapsing the monetary system, resetting it, and putting in something else, putting in a new monetary system. Again, no one has a crystal ball, and we don't want to be, we don't want to be like talking about the dark side or conspiracy theories. But ultimately, everyone that's listening to this, do some research. Back in 1944, they reset the monetary system to, create what we currently are utilizing today, right?
mm,
And that was just in 1944.
yeah,
And so 1971, there was another form of reset where they just removed the gold standard from the US dollar, right? Making it a fiat currency. And so ultimately, people just need to be educated, and you should pay attention to what's going on. Um, Now, I'm not a political person. Like, I don't pick sides. I just want efficiency. I'm pro efficiency, less about what people want to, less about the choices that people want to make in their lives, and more about productivity and efficiency.
yeah. Well, I think there's we get into the politics of anything, and sadly, I don't care what the government is. To your point, I don't think you can say government and efficiency and have them in the same sentence. It doesn't exist. You know, uh, they go out of their way to create the bureaucracy because that's what drives the jobs. And so, to your point, we don't want to always look at the doom and gloom and the dark side. I have a tendency to look at that dark side only because when I come to the community of real estate investors or our community of investors, part of what we provide is a perspective, some research that we do for you to investigate further to kind of start to form your thesis around it. When we look at what's happening in the monetary system and the debt, and we know that taxflation is a real thing. I mean, all we have to do is look at what's going on at the gas pumps to know that, guess what? The government loves inflated prices because, of course, tax comes along with that. And they're going to add to that now with what they call climate crisis. There's always an excuse to print more money and to create more tax. And at the end of the day, we have to have that tax revenue to pay the astronomical debt that we as a country have taken on. And Canada is not alone in any of that conversation. My point is around all of this, Alfonso, and you know this, and we know this, is that we have to look at the dark side to actually say, okay, well, how are we going to approach the future and create a financial future for our family? And, in our case, we look at real estate as a very, very proven, and even if you look at it logically, you can say, no, real estate is going to be that hedge that we have against the inflation that we're bound to hit. And there's going to be lots of deflation, by the way. I get all that technology, but at the end of the day, we've got a small country, or we've got a limited amount of housing for a lot of people coming into a country who are going to require housing. Canada is not going to go away of being that country that immigrants come into, and we have to hedge our bet. And that is one way to do it, is to invest in real estate inside of the scope of, you know, variable rates, or rates that those influencers, that rates are up, rates are down, you know, rents are up, rents are down, and unemployment's up, unemployment's down. We're looking at those economic fundamentals. The point is, when we're looking at where to park capital, real estate still works. I like to hedge a little bit, diversification. I own some Bitcoin, I own some precious metals. That's all, I think, part of my own hedge based on what I'm seeing economically. And I share that often with the community, is that really that's what it's about. If you've got money in the bank, you better be doing it strategically, as in, I think liquidity, as you know, Alfonso, is really important. And sometimes it's hard to manage that liquidity or keep it. But you also have to say, as I have that liquidity sitting off to the side, you know that it's, going away, it's devaluing. So it's a balance that we have to strike as investors and as business owners. So I went on a little bit. I don't know if that gave you an opening for to extend that conversation or not. I hope it did.
Absolutely. I mean, you need to, you make money, you need to invest it into income producing assets, right? And ultimately, the word current is in the word currency. If it's not moving and it's stagnant, it's losing money every single second. It's stagnant. The lending, the amount of money, the volume of money, the volatility of all the money moving around. If you stop, you're going to have problems, right?
Yeah.
And this is what the government's trying to do. They've always used this lever, which is interest rates, to manage inflation, but it's the wrong lever, because you know what? You can't shut the world down for 2 years, print all this money, and not have consequences. And so we're living as a result of those consequences. I just want the people that are watching this, or that are listening to this podcast, and this is a really, really, really interesting subject, because a lot of people really just want to talk about, all the great things that are happening in real estate. But these are things that you're going to want to pay attention to, right? You're going to want to pay attention to inflation. You're going to want to pay attention to what's happening and what's the political climate in the US, regardless of what side you're on, right? That's beside the point. It's just, you need to pay attention, because those moves can affect the money that you have. And so ultimately, what I always share with people is like, listen, Warren Buffett said it best: when people are greedy, you should be fearful. When people are fearful, you should be greedy, right? And right now, it's all about, and I don't know if people have the time to figure this thing out on their own, because I look at probably a 12-month window where you're going to see all of this opportunity in real estate. And these are the decisions that are people going to be making. And of course, you want to be smart. You want to be smart about the decisions you're making.